Okay, folks, I do see that we are live here. You getting the clearance, Corey?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, welcome to Quantum Leap with David and Corey, and we're excited to bring you a segment on daily habits. Which is another piece of I'd say the pie in terms of the bread and butter for this show. And we've talked about it before, but I wanted to phrase it as the 7 habits for success. And we're going to also have a few wild cards in there because they're more than 7, but in kind of recognition of this popular like landmark book, which I'm sure you've probably heard of and read maybe a few, the 7 habits of highly effective people. And I'll go over another kind of bonus book at the end that I always are 2 great books on habits. But first, I wanted to introduce my co-host Cory Knott. And Cory, if you don't mind, just giving a brief introduction to you, and if you have any opening on daily habits, feel free to say. Otherwise, we'll get to that later.
Sure. I am Cory and I am a coach for business partnerships and with Cake Wing Coaching. And I have a few comments on daily habits. I think they can be a challenge to obtain. We all have habits. No matter what we do, we all have habits. And so sometimes changing habits is actually about breaking an old one and keeping on top of the new one. And there's an accountability factor and a number of other things to go on. So I'm sure we'll discuss all that.
Yeah, yeah, very good. And I'm just sharing this to the broader audience. You know, First, there's kind of a number of, I think, there's business daily habits, and then there's personal, and there's so much blending that I find once you get a few in line, then things kind of really kind of start to take shape. And one big difference that in my own experience was really kind of setting up your calendar for success. And I know we've had Bob Arts, that business coach, on, who really has some fascinating things to say about calendar. But it's making sure, because if you set your calendar up right, and then you kind of guard that and protect your time, you're going to get those things done. And we're a big believer in the Ivan Meisner quote, probably one of his most famous ones, about success isn't about doing, 1,000 different things like a few times. It's about doing like maybe a handful of things like, several thousand times. And you say it a little better than I do, but you get the point. It's about doing kind of those key things over and over and making sure you get to them. And if you look at people who are successful in B&I, and I don't know if you would agree with that.
Yeah, well, I mean, Ivan's quote goes, I think, also to the idea that, especially as entrepreneurs and business owners, we like new shiny things, and uh, that can be, so when something doesn't work, we get disappointed and try something else. And the truth is rarely have we given it enough time, right? So if you try something 6 times and then it fails each time, it's worth reevaluating, but it isn't necessarily worth going on and doing something else, right? So you do, one thing, or well, they said so, 6 things one time versus 1,000 things. I can't think of it right off the bat. But the point being that repetition works in habits, and it also works in creating business. And we do see that in BNI. It's like stick to your 1 or 2 topics, right? Stay in your lane and focus on one thing to make it easier for other people and also for yourself. If you keep jumping around and trying new things, it just confuses people and yourself.
Yeah. One other habit I saw the other day was try not starting your day with a couple cups of black coffee before you've eaten anything. And, think there's just little habits that of finding what works for you, and everybody's a little different. My mom, kind of first thing, she'll drink a cup of coffee and that works for her, but other people it's maybe that can be a bit much for. So I do like that everything stems from the calendar, and that's a lot of times that's kind of in our head. But do you have any tips on how to set up a calendar as a business owner? Say you're starting a new business, maybe it's a partnership, but what are some of the key things that should go into that calendar, and how do you start thinking about that?
Well, I think first of all is have one. I know when I first started out, I just kind of kept everything in my head. I did not have a calendar, and I didn't always need one. Like, okay, there's BNI Wednesday morning, there's these things going on, but as time goes by, it just gets more and more complicated to do that. And and these calendar tools make things very, very easy to operate. I like Google Calendar because you can find it anywhere, right? It's on your phone, it's on your browser, it's pretty much tied into everything. But there are other good calendars too. Um, and I color code, so I color code each thing to some extent, so I know kind of what I'm doing in the week, what it's filled with. And then there's sometimes things that I put in the calendar that aren't locked in, but just nice to haves, and I color code those. And everybody's a little different. And Don Lyons is always about doing your calendar a year ahead, like get all the big things on the calendar, so that it's sort of like the idea of you have one jar of the big rocks, and then the little bits of sand and stuff can just fall into those places where they do. I'm not quite that aggressive with my calendar, but Gail is very, very good with her calendaring as well. So I think it's just important to use one to find out what your rhythm is. And if you're finding that things are not happening or you're missing things, that's when it's important to review how you're doing your calendaring and get better at it. That's a habit.
Yeah, and I actually have on here as my number seven, jumping ahead, experimenting with new habits and new things that can create efficiencies. And that ties into my number two thing that I wanted to set up about reading and podcasts, or kind of like personal development, which you see, we see with Mike and Don and you have a very, I call that experiment with different things. I'm always amazed with all the variety on your calendar in terms of what you're into, what types of events you go to, but also what kind of tools you're checking out. So, how is kind of this time, for example, maybe listening to this book on a podcast, the seven habits of effective habits of seven habits of highly effective people, that might be a good habit to start out to really dial in some new habits. But where does this kind of podcast or that development fit in with you?
Um, I'm not really sure what you mean by the question. It's
I guess I'm just saying, like, do you have as a habit to read new books or check out new podcasts or kind of new ways of doing things? I'm just getting at, we I just I feel like we want to constantly evolve our
yeah.
calendar in terms of how can we get better at it,
Yeah, I have not been a really big business book reader. I'm more of a summarizer. I like summaries. I like reading articles, so oftentimes it's like something that sort of summarizes something from a book. Just I find that when I get into a book, I get way too many ideas. I just kind of can't keep up with it. Love fiction and other types of things, and so I'm more of what are the key points, like what are the seven habits, and address them a little bit over time. And but I highly encourage a lot of reading, right? So it's just finding what it is that will sink into your head. So for me, it typically is more articles. And Gail loves podcasts. She likes listening. She likes having the video. So I think everybody's a little different in that regard. But there's a lot to learn from experts, and the market trends and what's going on in the world, not politically, but economically and for business, and trends over time. So I recommend, even like Seth Godin has a great little blog that's just maybe 100 to 150 words, and it comes out every day. So that's a good little tidbit. And then, if something they say interests you, you can always just research it further.
Yeah, no, I like that. And what I'm getting at too is that everybody's really different, and what we're into may be totally different depending on what we're working on. Say you have a new project or something, maybe, as you got into partnerships, you might have looked at some partnership, what other people are doing in the field.
Right.
But I do think if you've been in business for a while, you don't necessarily need to read a lot of business development books because you've kind of been doing it and it kind of a diminishing return, so to speak.
Yeah, I think we can always get better though. There's things that we miss. I mean, I'm in a number of networking groups and even getting into provisors lately, you see there's plenty of people who have, challenges, right? There's growth challenges and every, we might see something as a success, but the next level could be much harder to attain um using the same ideas, same way of doing things just isn't going to work for the next level that you want to get to. That was actually the whole point, I think, of part of my trip in August was, this idea that Odysseus was, the perfect man leaving home, and he was the perfect warrior king for, fighting in Troy. But then when it came to actually getting back home, everything that he was great at just did not work. And so he kept failing until he finally figured it out. But so I think that that's, a good metaphor for what business owners go through as things change. Our skills have to keep up.
Yeah, we saw a lot of that during COVID. Think of how
Sure.
people run their business.
Yeah.
It really flipped everything upside down. And then you got to pick up the pieces. Number three, we'll go through a few of these quick, and we can talk more about a couple of these. We could even have their own episode. But my number three is revenue generating activities. If you're kind of in a new business, one thing Prodna Leitner, my other colleague and who we've had on the show, she said, prioritize revenue generating activities
Right.
first. Think about if, for example, if you have open projects that you need to get done or possibly new clients, you probably need to save at least some small segment of your calendar. I like to do it earlier in the day to make sure it gets done and not overlooked. Or maybe you can say, well, can I get back to you tomorrow or something on that? But make sure you keep those balls in the air and, don't drop them if they're potential new clients that are expecting a call back.
Right. Well, that's a good thing to put in your calendar, right? Is to break out that time of the day so it doesn't. So if you stick to your calendar, then you will be doing that as a more of a habit rather than making that time available to other things that aren't revenue generating or would be a distraction.
Yeah, and this goes along with this, and I love your approach, your and Gail's approach, the CRM, which is client retention management. Is that what it stands for? And this is really your whole
Relationship
client relationship management
or
for
customer.
how you manage your clients. And this was a big thing. This continues to be a big ongoing thing for me that I try to continue to improve. But you guys set it up for me to begin with, and I really love your approach to it. I don't know if you have any just thoughts on what.
Yeah, I do. And I think that even though they typically are called like customer or client relation management, I think in these smaller solo businesses, especially where we do a lot of networking and so on, I would look at it as more of a contact relationship management, right? So customer, colleague, vendor, it doesn't really matter who it is. There's information to know about them because they are part of your network and potentially they may not become clients, but they could potentially bring clients or have people who can bring you clients. So we treat the CRM as this sort of, contact database, right? You can use the Google contact database, you can use the Outlook database, but it doesn't really give you a lot of knowledge. And whereas a CRM can give you a good idea of, who they are. And if they're in your referral network, if they're in your wider network, like your information network, um, right now I'm really building out my information network as I'm trying to produce some books and get people who are potential resources for my clients. And and there's many different types of things that people need, so it's good to have people who can, experts that can answer that and then become part of the referral network. So that's where the CRM is can be really valuable, is keeping track of a lot of those pieces.
Yeah, this is also something that I think is where a coach can be helpful to really kind of
Yeah.
discern what those pieces are, because a lot of people might not even think of that as a system. It's kind of just like survival. But really, if you can get a process, for example, like TNT Fitness, those guys at TNT Fitness, how do you like onboard new clients and keep them, happy? For example, one issue they had was if you kind of pass them off to another coach, but they have a good relationship with one person, that can kind of create a sticking point. Or so
Yeah.
there's ways to keep that service up and keep people happy.
Well, I
Um,
think it's also, yeah, it's also important to consider what you need out of that too, what your customers need. I've been done consulting a lot on software, and CRM is a buzzword, and every CRM package out there says it will do all these different things. You ask if it'll do something, they say yes, right? The salespeople say yes, and so sometimes we need something different. We need like there's a couple of other terms out there. There's CIM, which is customer information management, which might be necessary if there's a lot of information you're keeping track of. Like if you are a personal trainer and you want to know all the details of where a person is at any time in their journey and where they've been, that would be information versus relationship. And it would be hard to plug in those numbers. So there's probably specific softwares, usually for an industry, or say in HR, you need a lot of document management. And then there's ERP, the enterprise resource planner, or I can't think quite off the third word, but it tends to run more of the organization, not just information and relationships. Sorry, we're kind of getting off the thing there, but it's a habit.
yeah,
Keeping track of
yeah,
that data is a habit, and software can make it a lot easier. It can make it a lot more painful, depending on what direction you go.
yeah, yeah. Because there's things with key referral partners and then clients. There's always those key bits of information that you
Right.
almost have to remember from like if you didn't take notes. I like how you have your notepad, so maybe it's a new potential power partner. You want, they shouldn't have to repeat those things. You know what's important. You want to
Right.
kind of learn what it is up front, and so you're always kind of moving forward. But how do you keep track of all those notes? And
Well, I think AI is going to be the answer for that. Is where I'm looking at it. Just trying to get it to do that has not been, but it's coming. We're starting to see AI driven CRM, which
yeah, interesting. I know. Well, a couple quick things here. We'll just run through, and we got another guest at 11. I'm going to go a little over on this segment. I let him know, so I get through all the items. But I have a number 5 here: exercise and meditation. You hear a lot of people, they say, "Oh, I can't go to the gym. I'm too busy." But I think a big thing in my life too is always to prioritize the exercise and/or meditation. Maybe it's a walk, but doing something to like clear your head. And I think that was particularly important during COVID, to make sure you get outside and at least have some time for your health. But I don't know how you,
yeah,
if you,
my recommendation. I'm not good with the gyms. I don't like going to the gym. I did it. I worked with personal trainers. I did all that stuff, but I just am not a gym person. And what I found works really well for me is to have an outdoor hobby. So I've got chickens, I've got goats and ducks and animals out there in a big backyard, and that I try to spend a couple hours a day out there working on things. And it doesn't necessarily happen every day, but it's really good exercise. And not everybody has that or wants that, but there can also be, hiking or some activity that gets you outdoors, that you enjoy, right? I mean, some people like the gym and like that routine. It's me being kind of high on ADHD. It just doesn't really been, I can't, I don't get I don't have that motivation to do one thing in one place. So, but if there's something productive involved, then I'm all over it. I like to be productive when working out, is what I learned. So,
yeah, yeah, and you actually can save a lot of time by not going to the gym too if you do other stuff, because you got to travel there and back. And I go to the gym kind of half the time and then do other stuff half the time. So,
yeah, I mean,
um,
some people find it meditative and it works well. Me, I learned about myself is I need to be, when I'm doing something, I need to be productive. It needs to have like an end result for that moment. So, feeding the chickens and moving bags of cement and feed and building fences and all that, there's always an end result, and it takes a lot of work and exercise. So it works well.
yeah, yeah, great. Couple quick things and we'll wrap up. I have number 6: set up a quarterly plan. That there's good to think long term. And I got this from you and Gail, who I love what you say about take on one big project a quarter. Say, I'm going to
Right.
do this for this quarter and make it, get that done. And then everything else comes a little secondary. And of course, you do other things Um, yeah. And then 7, I have experiment with new habits, which I already set up. And, maybe when we have Gail on at some point, we can talk a little bit more in detail about some of these items that you guys talked together about so well. The other book I just want to mention was this Atomic
Atomic Habits.
Habits,
Yeah.
which is a good thing. And their belief, even if you just listen to the first part, is if we're just improving by 1% every so often, and we keep that mindset that we keep improving, that's a big difference from saying, oh, I'm just going to do things the same way, because that 1% compounds. If you do that daily or monthly, you evolve things and you get a lot better at what you do. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a good book.
Well, good. Well, we're going to let our guest in here at 11 and we'll get going with the second segment. I'm going to stop the live stream here. And thanks for listening to this first segment of Quantum Leap on Habits. Dave and Corey signing off.
Thanks, everyone.